Hi everyone, welcome and thank you for joining us today. My name is Claudia and on behalf of TestingUy, I want to welcome you to this talk. This week has been amazing. Today is the last day of TestingUy 2020-21, sorry, something like that. I always mess up with numbers. And we are thrilled about today's sessions. Welcome Rob. Rob is joining us from US. Thank you for joining us and for sharing your knowledge with the TestingUy community. We are very excited that you are joining us today. And an extra thanks to Rob. He's on holidays and he's joining us today. So I will give the stage to Rob and let's start this session. Thank you very much.
Hi, welcome to TestingUy. We're going to talk about gaining confidence with Cypress Tests. Let's dig in. Here's the part where I tell you I am definitely going to post the slides on my site tonight. I've been that guy chasing the speaker and it is no fun, which is why you can go to robrich.org right now. Let's do it. robrich.org, we'll click on presentations up here at the top, and here's gaining confidence with Cypress Tests right at the top of the list. You can get to both the presentation and the code. It is online right now. The code's up here on GitHub. While we're here on robrich.org, let's click on About Me and learn about some of the things that I've done recently. I'm a Microsoft MVP, a friend of Redgate, a Cyril developer advocate, and AZ GiveCamp is really fun. AZ GiveCamp brings volunteer developers together with charities to build free software. We start building software Friday after work. Sunday afternoon, we deliver that completed software to the charities. Sleep is optional, caffeine provided. If you're in Phoenix, come join us for the next AZ GiveCamp. Or if you'd like a GiveCamp in your neighborhood, hit me up on email or on Twitter, and let's get a GiveCamp in your neighborhood too. Some of the other things that I've done, I worked on the Gulp team as core contributor in version 2 and version 3, and I replied to a .NET Rocks podcast episode. They read my comment on the air, and they sent me a mug. So that's my claim to fame. Woohoo! Awesome. So let's dig into Cypress. Now, we talked about this guy. I'm not quite sure how these demos will go, so let me give it a try and see if I can do it. Let's see if these demos will work. So I'm just going to fire up some tests and we'll see if this site will work the way we expect. My tests are loading. Let's see. Let's see. Is it going to go? Is it going to go? My tests are loading. There's my test kicking off. Ooh, it needs to warm up the site a little bit. Yep, that test passed. That test passed. Looks like these tests are going to work. Yes. This should be a great demo. Great. So we just fired up some tests and took a look at interesting things. And let's flip back. Cypress. Cypress is browser-based functional testing, or said differently, it's an Electron app runner and a browser plugin that allows us to do end-to-end testing. It's for testing our websites. Now, the cool part about this is because it's an app runner and a browser plugin, we can dig deep into our application to be able to make some really cool assertions. It's built on top of Mocha and Chai, so the tests that you're already writing are probably really familiar. Like many good stories, we started in the middle. Let's back up a little bit and talk about the various types of tests and how Cypress fits in context. Here in browser testing, now there's definitely other types of testing. We could do automation testing of desktop apps or mobile apps or watch apps, IoT devices. This will focus on browser tests. Now, as we look at testing our application in the browser, there's a couple of things that we can look at. We can test from here down. We might think of this as end-to-end tests. We could test this API. Maybe we need to flex graph or gRPC or GraphQL type of experiences. We can test this service. And by service, I don't mean a web service, but rather a service in our application, a small unit of functionality. We can validate that this unit works as expected. We could also test this component. That's when integration or when UI things start to come into play, and where we can start to simulate users clicking and see if our component behaves the way we expect. And we can test that this works in that browser. Now with HTML5, that's less of a concern, but it's still good to know that our tests run in different browsers. Now this isn't integration tests, this isn't end-to-end tests in various browsers, this is unit tests in browsers. So let's look at the tools that we would use to do this. If we're going to unit test this service, the small piece of functionality, we'd probably use Mocha with Chai or Jest. If we're unit testing this in a particular browser, then we can run our unit test, Mocha with Chai or Jest, inside of Karma. Karma will launch all of our tests in various browsers and make sure they work as expected. If we want to test this component, we can use TestUtils. There's a TestUtils library with React, Angular, and Vue, and so you can plug that in, mount your components, and either choose to mock out or fully render all of the child components as you validate this component. For API tests, you don't need a browser at all. You could use Supertest. It'll just make requests at that API endpoint, and you can validate that you get the results that you want. There's no user interaction or browser involved. For end-to-end tests, where you want to be able to click through things and validate things work as expected, then we can use things like Selenium, Cypress, Test Cafe, or Playwright. As you grab these slides from robrich.org, you can click on any of these blue links to get to the various sites and learn more about these tools. Let's double click into end-to-end tests and take a look at those. As we're looking at end-to-end tests, we have a bunch of different mechanisms. Selenium is our de facto standard end-to-end test system, and it works pretty well. On the upside, Selenium has lots of different mechanisms built into browsers. WebDriver is pretty much a browser standard, and most browsers implement that. On the downside, it's pretty hands-off. We're really sending Win32 events to drive our browsers. We're not deeply integrated into the page. So the tests are fragile. We need to wait for things to appear and guess how long it might take. And, well, if our Selenium test breaks, we'll probably go back and increase the timeout there, making our tests a little bit slower. Next up, let's take a look at Cypress. Cypress is that Electron app and browser plugin. Because we've got this browser plugin, we can now integrate deeply into the DOM. So rather than waiting for a thing and guessing how long it'll take, we can say, wait until the DOM ready event, or wait until this page finish rendering, or wait until this API request finishes. Cypress is great at being able to deeply integrate, and because of that, we don't need to wait a particular time. We can just wait until it's ready. Cypress has this Electron IDE and great debugging tools. It also will record videos and screenshots at various places if we need it. The Cypress API is kind of built on a jQuery-like experience, so they do have a .then, but it doesn't work the way promises work, and so we can't really await it. Cypress also, because it's deeply integrated into each browser, there isn't yet a browser plugin for Safari. Next up, Test Cafe. Now, if you're using other DevExpress tools, this may feel right at home. On the upside, unlike Cypress, it doesn't have kind of a wacky jQuery UI. It uses CSS selectors. On the downside, they invented their own assertion syntax. So unlike Mocha with Chai or Jest, this one's going to feel a little weird. They do have great browser support, so you can work inside of Safari, but you'll have a different context for your web page and for your test. So you'll spend a lot of time marshalling data back and forth between them. If you use other things by DevExpress, Test Cafe can be great. As you grab the slides from robrich.org, click through to learn more. Next up, Playwright. Playwright was built by the same people who built Puppeteer, and it builds on that success. If you've ever remote controlled Chrome using Puppeteer, you'll feel right at home with Playwright. Playwright has SDKs in JavaScript, TypeScript, Python, C#, Go, and others. And so you can code in many different languages, unlike Cypress or Test Cafe that are only in JavaScript. It feels a lot like Puppeteer, and so if you're at home in Puppeteer, then this will be great. On the downside, it feels like the assertion syntax was kind of an afterthought. So it'll feel a little weird. We also have this same mechanism of marshalling back and forth between the browser and the test. So ultimately, you really can't go wrong with any of these frameworks, whether you're using Selenium or Test Cafe or Playwright or Cypress. You can have great success. But let's double click into Cypress and take a look at that. As we get started with Cypress, we'll say npm install, and that will get us Cypress. Once we've got that, we can say npx cypress open, and that will pop open this Cypress IDE. Now this Cypress IDE is, as you launch it the first time, it will create a whole bunch of tests that are great for being able to flex a kitchen sink experience, where you can take a look at all different mechanisms for interacting with the page. I'm going to close that. Here inside the IDE, we can pick a particular test and run that, or we can run all tests. This will run not only the 2 that I have open, but also the 19 inside that example folder. Now I can choose what browser to run them on. Right now, I'm running them on Chrome 92, but it'll also look through all of the browsers that I have installed on my machine and let me pick a different one, including Electron 89, which is bundled in with the Cypress Electron app. It's actually Chromium under the hood. Now, once I've chosen my browser and chosen the test, I can fire it up and it will do that test run. So for example, here's the test run that we ran earlier. Now this is going to test a to-do MVC app, and we can get a feel for how that works. Now it's going to do a JavaScript, TypeScript compile here. That's why it kicks off twice. But now we can see that we're running in a different version of Chrome. I've got regular Chrome open here, and I have a new Chrome profile here so that I won't get any bleed from cookies or my browser plugins. It's in a completely separate environment. But it is running inside of a browser. And so the beautiful thing here is I can open up the Chrome developer tools, and I can take a look at the console output. Now the interesting thing is, as I step through a particular test, I'll actually get the console output at that step, which is really elegant. Now I can also take a look at this. Here's that red dot. That's where it clicked when it did this click to be able to get that new to-do. We can walk through each of the steps and we can see what it did at that step. Now one of the cool things, because this is just a browser, we can also come in here and grab our sources and set a breakpoint at a particular spot. Once we have that breakpoint set, then when we're debugging our test, we'll hit exactly there and we can just wander around like we would with any JavaScript. One of the things that's particularly cool here is that selecting things might get kind of interesting. We can click this selector playground button and then go pick a particular thing, and it will highlight the sci.get command that we need to be able to get here. Now we'll talk much more about how to make selectors more optimized. That selector is pretty fragile right now, but we can see that we can navigate through and build up our selectors this way. Great, so we've gotten a feel for the Cypress IDE and how we would run tests. Let's take a look at the code that we'll look at. So I've got this Cypress and TypeScript project set up, and you can grab it here on GitHub. Clone this repo or just download it, and you can get at exactly the code that we're going to look at today. I've got it open here in VS Code, and our first stop here is the cypress.json file. The cypress.json file tells us, in particular, where the rest of our configuration is. Let's take a look at that plugins file, and we'll take a look at the configuration that we've got. Now this identifies the rest of the folders for all of the pieces. Now I chose to take the screenshots and the videos and put them in the results folder so that I can just ignore that with my .gitignore. My support file is here. That will yield commands. We'll come back to that one. My integration folder, where all my tests live, is right here. And the fixtures folder is right here that gives us some sample data. So now that we've got that configuration in place, I did add TypeScript. Now here in my main tsconfig file, we can see the basic TypeScript definitions for my application. Now it's just the normal details I don't have anything special in here that's specific to Cypress. But inside my test/Cypress folder, I have a second tsconfig. Now this tsconfig file will give me the details that I need to make my TypeScript in my Cypress project work as expected. Now I'm specifically going to say it extends that base tsconfig so that I don't need to duplicate all the options that I want to set. I only need to override things. Now I'm going to pull in the node modules/Cypress to get some additional content, and also include the Cypress types to be able to get TypeScript definitions for my Cypress content. Perfect. Now that we've got Cypress configured, our next step is to open up Cypress. Now, I created some scripts here so that we can just run npm run cy.run, and it will run all of the Cypress tests. We can do cy.:open to do a Cypress open, and that will get us to the IDE. Or if we want to specify specific browsers, we might choose to run them this way. So for example, I have a run Chrome, run Firefox, and run Edge commands. And now in my test, I'll say run this one, and run this one, and run this one. And if they all work, then I know that my test works correctly or my site works correctly in Chrome, Firefox, and in Edge. That's great. So now let's take that out for a spin. We saw how we spun up the tests and how we could jump into one of the tests. Let's look at the code that produces that. Here's to-do mvc.spec. Now this to-do MVC is based on the to-do MVC app. Now the cool part about this to-do MVC app, it's a smidge dated now, but it's the same implementation in lots of different frameworks. So Backbone or Knockout, Vue or Angular, Dart, JWT, it's the exact same user experience, in theory using the exact same HTML and CSS files so that you can easily compare the frameworks. Now in my case, in this test, I have an example running Angular and Backbone and Vue so that I can just comment out or uncomment the test that I want to run. In this case, let's run the AngularJS version. I'm going to go grab that name just so that I can output that in my test runner. And now before each, I'm going to say sci.visit and give it this URL. Now I could do a sci.visit inside the top of each test, but doing it centrally here just makes it a little bit easier. One less line in each test. Now notice that we're not awaiting it. By the time sci.visit finishes, we know that the page is loaded correctly. Perfect. Our first test is kind of a hello world test. I'm just going to say sci.url should equal the site URL. Now I'm glad I have this hello world test because as I was building this talk, they switched from HTTP to HTTPS, and so I got a failure on this test. It automatically redirected me from HTTP to HTTPS, and I was able to update my test to go grab that content. Perfect. First step, I landed on the site that I wanted to. Now here's that jQuery syntax. .should equal the site URL. Okay, next up, let's start to interact with the page. As we level up, I'm going to do a sci.get. Now I know my page is already loaded. It loaded in the before each to ensure that that page was there. And I'm going to go get all of the list items inside my to-do list. And in this case, it should not exist. I haven't created any to-dos yet. Okay, once we've got that running, let's level up again. Now we want to start to interact with the site. Now in this case, I'm going to type a to-do into place. Let's go find that new to-do box and we will type this new to-do content. Now I've separated it out here so that I can use it to validate. I'm going to write a Cypress test and then I will push enter. Now we see this curly brace doesn't have the $sign in front of it. We're not actually grabbing the enter variable, but rather we're pushing the enter key. We can use this syntax for pressing function keys, shift, control, and all kinds of other interesting keys. If we need to access those particular keys, we can use this syntax. So perfect, I've typed a new to-do and I pushed enter. Let's flip now to our assertion and we'll go look at that list, and that should have the to-do that I built. I'm also going to go look at the new to-do box and make sure its value is now blank. Great. So now we've been able to create a to-do. We interacted with it, we typed into a box, and we did a selection to be able to validate that content. Let's level up again. Next up, we should mark a to-do as completed. So now I'm going to go look for my to-do, and I'm going to type some irrelevant to-do data. I want to make sure that when I complete it, I'm completing the correct one. So let's type one that we don't need, and then flip over and type one that we do need. Okay, now let's go look in that view and go grab that to-do and click on the toggle button. That will mark it as completed. Now this syntax is a little bit weird. I needed to go loop through my view list and find the correct one that I wanted to run. This is kind of a sub-filter, and so there's that jQuery syntax again. Okay, so I clicked on that button, and now I want to go look through my to-do list, filtering by that new to-do, and I should have a class of completed. Perfect. So it's going to find all of the list items, filter it down to the list item that includes my to-do text, and validate that I have the correct CSS class. Let's level up again. In this case, I should delete a to-do. Now I've got a new to-do, and I've got an irrelevant to-do. Let's go create an irrelevant to-do so that we make sure that we're deleting the correct one. I've got a new to-do. Let's enter that into place. And now let's go find that to-do item in the list, and we'll go find the destroy button. Now in this case, the destroy button doesn't show until we hover over it. Now in this case, Cypress is running all of the JavaScript events, but the browser may not keep up with all of the CSS events. So in this case, I very specifically need to say force is true to go click the button even when it's not visible. Now that's perfect. If I was hovering over it, it would pop up, it would be visible, and I could click it just fine. But there's no concept of hover inside JavaScript. Okay, so I've clicked the delete button, and now let's go find all of the visible things, and I should only have one left. Now I could have clicked the wrong button, so let's take that additional step and go validate that the to-do list should contain my irrelevant to-do. I didn't delete the new to-do that I wanted to make. That's perfect. Next up, should show only active tasks. Okay, in this case, we're going to go look for, Now we built a whole bunch of stuff to create these new to-dos, and that was kind of a lot. So let's go create this function that will allow us to build up the to-dos differently. I'm going to come in here to my commands, and in this case, import those commands. And I've got the commands here, so I'm going to create a new to-do add command. Now here, the new to-do, I'll type this text, and once I type it, I'll just go quickly validate that the text took and got into place. Now this being TypeScript, I do need to tell TypeScript how to do this as well, and so I have this commands.d.ts, this TypeScript declaration file that will augment the Cypress command to give it these new commands. Now that I've got that in place, now I can just say to do add. Now that's a whole lot more descriptive in my test. Rather than just saying .new to do and type some stuff, I have something that is very descriptive of what I have in mind. So let's go add 3 to-dos. I will complete one of the to-dos. That's another command that I built. And then I'll go find the active button and click it. Now I should be filtered to only the 2 irrelevant actions. So let's go validate that I have a length of 2. Great. We'll round this out by only showing completed tasks and clearing deleted tasks. I'm going to use my functions again to do add and to do complete. It's really nice to be able to grab those pieces and just automatically do those. If you used a page object inside of Selenium, then this will feel right at home. Now, ideally, I would have a data-CY attribute so that I could go get the exact completed button that I wanted. But in this case, I don't have a whole lot of control over that site, so I have to kind of build this CSS selector to get there. We'll come back to making these attributes to be able to run tests in a really elegant way. Okay, so once I've completed it, I should have a length of 1. I should have only 1 completed task now that I filtered in that way. And finishing it out, we'll do a similar thing, clear the completed, and now I shouldn't have any in my list because I've added 1, completed it, and then cleared it. So this was a really elegant way to be able to dig into it. Next up, let's level up into validating URLs. Now, in this case, we're going to take a look at Hacker News PWA. Hacker News PWA is kind of the spiritual successor to To-Do MVC, and it shows the particular content from Hacker News inside of a percussive web app. So if I fire this up, Hacker News PWA, we will see that we're making a web request off to a real server. Now in this case, it would be difficult to validate content based on this mechanism because, well, the real server may give unexpected results. So when I'm running my test, I can't necessarily validate that, for example, the first title is a known attribute. So instead, we can mock out that request and we can say, use a fixture instead of the actual web request. Now, we shouldn't just rely on that mock data because we may have a spot where we do need to get at the real data in this test. Ooh, it looks like the service that I was contacting was offline for a second. Let's rerun this test. Yeah, it probably should help to have a warm-up test to go validate it. And there we see all of the tests pass. So looking through this code, let's take a look at the Hacker News site. Similarly, we could flip into lots of different mechanisms for running this Hacker News site, but in this case, we'll use the Angular 2 version. I'm going to load the page before each test and validate that my site is as I expect. Now in this case, I want to validate that my control renders correctly. Now I can't assume that I have a specific first story, so instead let me intercept traffic going to this particular URL. Now in this case I chose a regular expression, but you could also use a string here. I'm going to set some headers to ensure that I can go cross origin, and I'll use the data from this fixture. Here's this fixture with Hacker News data, and I know that my first item in this list has this title. So now I can make some real assertions here. I can validate that I have the first child in the list contains that title. I've rendered my news story correctly. Now we don't want to just mock out all of the web requests. So in this test, we're going to load the stories and we're going to go validate that we have 30 results from the real service. Now we can assume that Hacker News will have more than 30 stories, so I think this might be a safe assumption. Now, if this was particularly slow, I could say cy.intercept, give it that regex or string, and name it a particular thing, and then cy.wait on that name. In this case, the service responded fast enough, and I was able to just continue on. So in both of these tests, we were able to experience some really cool experiences around Cypress. As we look at best practices, we want to take a look at mechanisms for selecting easily. Now, we could do a full XPath like a thing or a CSS selector that was really complex, but as we refactor our application, those tests are really fragile. Better, use an ID or a class to be able to select that item directly. Now, if we nest it in more controls, more divs, or we refactor our site, then maybe our tests won't break. But, well, if we're depending on a class and that class is used to style content, it still might get renamed out from under us. Even better, create a data-cy attribute on our element, and now we have self-documented that this element is specific to this test. I know if I'm going to go change a data-cy element somewhere that I probably will need to update my test. Now when I'm in my Cypress thing, I can just say cy.get, pass in something that contains this data-cy element, and go grab exactly the thing that I needed. That's perfect. Next up, another best practice. Create commands for frequent tasks. We did this a lot in Selenium with page objects, and we can do it here in Cypress to be able to create named commands that make our tests much more descriptive. As we flip to creating new to-do items with these elements, with these commands, then we could self-document our tests so that our test execution was just a series of business steps, and the implementation could be reused across tests. That's perfect. Now, we did need to modify the content to be able to set up Cypress to run with TypeScript, and here's that link there that says not only do you create the commands.add, but you also create this commands.d.ts, the TypeScript declaration file, that gives you more details about how to focus in on that test. Another best practice, avoid logging in at the beginning of each test. Instead, definitely validate the login procedure, but probably before all tests, call an API to get a token and reuse that token through the rest of the tests. You can make tests really slow if you're validating the login page at the beginning of each experience. As you grab these slides from robrich.org, click through here to the Cypress docs that explains this best practice. Another best practice, use mock data. Use fixtures when you want to keep other things out of play. Now we use fixtures together with API mocks to be able to get our content into place when we wanted to validate the constructs inside of our control. Now we also don't want to lie to ourselves and completely assume that the API will always reply this way, so we also have a test that hits the real API, making an assertion that isn't about particular content of the data, but rather just validates the shape of the data. We'll need tests for each. Here's the docs to cy.intercept to be able to set that up. Cypress is a really fun place to work, and I've had a blast being able to create Cypress tests that allow me to validate my test end to end. You can grab this code up on robrich.org and hit me up in that spot where the conference has designated for questions and answers. If you're watching this later, hit me up on Twitter at rob_rich, and let's dig in. Thanks for joining us at TestingUy. This was so much fun getting to share with you Cypress.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you for joining us today. Let me check the feed if there is any comment. Thank you for your time. You're on holiday, so we appreciate a lot that you are joining us today. Let me check.
Most definitely. I'm so glad I could join you.
Thank you. First of all, there are some comments. Great talk. Congratulations. Thanks. And I will translate one question. Is there any a tool like self-healing code for Cypress?
Self-healing code? I don't believe so. There are some tools that help you record tests automatically. You might find similar tools with Selenium to help you record tests. But as with Selenium, usually the quality of the recorded tests aren't as great as the tests that you write yourself, mostly because of those selectors. You know, if we can get a data-cy selector, then we can get at exactly the element that we want. When we record tests, we're not usually thinking about those selectors. And so we may end up with a really long XPath of describing how to get to this element. It creates a fragile, brittle test.
Great, thank you. A similar question, but instead of about self-healing code, it's about machine learning. Thank you.
Machine learning. I haven't found a good way to connect machine learning with Cypress, but that is really intriguing. Sounds like I have some homework to do.
Thank you, Rob. Let me check if there is another question or comment. Yeah, there is one. Do you recommend using Cucumber plus Cypress? Is it a common combination in GS?
What was that with Cypress?
Cucumber plus Cypress using GS.
Cucumber with Cypress. Yes, that would make a really elegant solution, because now you have all of the beauty of that gherkin syntax, and you can just kind of form the test and then have that run Selenium or not Selenium, have it run Cypress in place. That could be really beautiful. I love it.
Thank you. I will check again. Yeah, we have another question. Can you delve a bit into why jQuery is a Cypress con?
I find the jQuery syntax a little bit weird. jQuery was kind of before async and await, and so Cypress has a .then method that looks really appealing when you find it in the documentation, but it doesn't work the way you expect. And so you can't, for example, switch that to await and then continue on with the .then method, because that's not really the way it works. So I would rather that they kind of embraced promises and focused in on that mechanism if they needed a .then. But as you can see from the code, from the examples that we have here, we didn't use .then at all. So it's not too bad. The other part that, that bothers me a smidge is that a lot of the assertions are strings. So if ever we've gotten worried about magic strings in our code, should dot equal, should dot not equal, those are strings inside of Cypress, where all else being equal in Mocha with Chai or with Jest, those are extension methods off of those particular objects. So I find that syntax a little bit better because now TypeScript can help me with it. TypeScript isn't great at examining the strings and assuming that those are correct.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Rob. Let me check if there is another comment or question. Otherwise, we are wrapping up. Yeah, we have Ezequiel. Please, do you prefer to use the mic? Please turn on. Thank you very much, Ezequiel.
Hello. Hello, everyone. Thanks, Rob. I was curious about the future of testing using artificial intelligence. Where do you see this technology fitting into testing in the next few years?
Oh, great question. Stepping aside from Cypress and just looking at artificial intelligence on its own, I think machine learning around user interface testing is a really elegant mechanism for doing that. Because we can watch the site and we can get machine learning to be able to build us algorithms for identifying common behavior. Maybe we can use logs from our website to be able to seed that test and be able to use that to power our machine learning based testing algorithms. It's a wonderful opportunity. As we refactor our application, as our business needs change, then that may be less effective because for the most part, what machine learning does for us is it takes the assumptions that we've made previously and it carries them forward. If ever we're going to change those assumptions, then it may not be as helpful.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ezequiel, for your question too. Okay.
Yeah. One question I often get right here is, you use TypeScript here. Do I need to use TypeScript or can I use JavaScript? The majority of content that you'll see around Cypress is in JavaScript. I chose to do it in TypeScript here just because it was a fun challenge. But whether you use TypeScript or JavaScript, your Cypress test will work out just fine.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Rob. Thank you a lot for your time, for making it possible for us to having you in our stage, virtual stage, and hope you enjoy the session too and enjoy your holidays for sure. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for having me. This was so much fun.
Thank you very much, Rob. Take care and thank you again. Thank you all and see you in the next session.